we're going to continue with something fantastic. Elena Schütz, Julian Schubert are here from their team. And something fantastic is kind of an unusual architecture office because they don't normally do architecture in the way that you may have known it, but they do a lot of other things, ranging from urban design, architectural design as well, but also they make fashion shows, they make graphic design. They are the graphic designers of all of Ruby Press's books, the company I founded with Ilka Ruby. So we've known each other for quite some time. And they are also teaching at the ETH Zurich, at the MAS Urban Design, Master of Advanced Science Urban Design with Marc-Ange Lille. And they have been producing a number of projects where, like with the students together, where they explored the conditions of creating like common assets in the way that we use cities. And they're going to talk about, I think, one of them, but also a project that they did independently. And I'm really happy that they are here. Julian, Elena.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks very much for the invitation. Maybe just as a comment to what you were just what Andreas was just saying, like how can we as architects react on like keep our independence and react in this kind of complex, wicked field of building and the city and so on. I would say our answer as a practice to that is we try to diversify. So all these different projects we do also keep us a certain independence and freedom in doing, like, we always know we have a different thing that we can also kind of follow. That's just a comment on the question of how do you practice architecture. And we're going to show you two projects that are very different from each other. Common luxury, maybe one is more common, the other is more luxury, but we thought they could maybe evoke a discussion. Elena will start.
The first one is actually work that we've done with the ETH in Zurich with a group of students. Like we've been working on the context of Brazil and social housing for several years with the course, and we would like to show you 4 ideas that students had in the course, just to give you a rough idea of what we're aiming for, what we're looking for. Like you might find them very basic ideas, but I think that's exactly what is needed in that kind of context. So first, a short introduction into the status quo in Brazil. That's the Minha Casa Minha Vida housing project. And it's basically a financial system to fight the scarcity of housing in Brazil. It's bank loans that are given to, it's based on ownership, so there's bank loans giving to people under the precondition that the buildings that are being produced have a certain, like they are actually very clearly regulated. What you see on the picture is a typical example of what comes out of this housing program. And one of the reasons why we think that this, like working in that context is beyond Brazil very interesting or very important is that this is something that we find in many other countries too. Like this, I could show you a picture of like the 2 million homes program in Mexico. It would look like pretty much exactly like it, I think. So short introduction to the program. There's basically 2 different types. There's the single housing, the single house that you just saw in the picture, and there's like an apartment block. The heights of the blocks are limited by the fact that this program can't afford elevators, so they usually have just 5 floors. They look extremely similar just because of the rules that they're following. And there's projects like in, Brazil is a big country with very different climates, but the buildings that you find from this program, they look exactly the same all over the country. Some examples. left the single unit, the single family unit, and on the right the apartment block. And these are like, this is just we tried to get to know to the principles and to the rules as exactly and as like detailed as possible. So we try to become experts in understanding exactly the requirements of the program, because for us it was clear that with the projects that we're developing, we have to stay exactly within those rules. If we're like designing something that is in some way outside of the rules and the requirements of the program, it's not going to work, and it's also not going to be interesting for neither the policymakers nor the building firms. So it tells you how big the kitchen can be. It tells you how many windows you can have.
The whole, maybe add that the whole program is like a Marshall Plan. So the idea of the program by the Brazilian government is to boost a building economy, because a building economy creates jobs. So that's one of the underlying ideas of this whole program. So that's also why it's all in huge numbers. It's the biggest social housing program in the world, actually. And as Elena said, distributed all over the country. It's just about building a lot of houses very fast. So the case we looked at different cases in Rio and Sao Paulo, but the case we want to show you is actually in Parauapebas. Parauapebas is in the state of Pará, so at the southeastern edge of the Amazon rainforest, which is, you see on the right side already, like the light green is the deforested areas, the dark green is still forest. So the whole idea about to build or to think about urban planning in the Amazon rainforest from like being in Switzerland, or from our perspective, of course, seems a bit weird, because here we have the tendency to say, don't touch the Amazon rainforest, it must be a forest and so on. But clearly they are. I mean, the mine that we actually looked at, the mine is not there because they like so much iron ore. The mine is there because the iron ore is used for buildings in China, in Europe, in the US. I mean, it's also somehow, we're also related to the situation there.
In a way, we felt like the context of the Amazon is really clearly a global context, because it makes the global climate, and because like global resources are produced.
So what you see here is at the edge of just where the dark green starts, you see one island of dark green. That's where I'm gonna zoom in here. So the island was a national park in which there is the biggest iron ore mine, the biggest open pit iron ore mine in the world, which is on the left. It's the Carajás mine. And then the dark green is that island of national forest. And on the right, you see the city of Parauapebas. So originally, there was one street into the forest, along which there was an airport, the thing over there, that's an airport, and there, between the airport and the mine, there's the nucleus, which was originally intended to be the city or the neighborhood for the workers. But of course, it's way too little.
We actually found Parauapebas as a place to concentrate on, because we were simply looking for the fastest growing city in Brazil, and that's what it is.
Yeah. So the city on the eastern edge of this national forest is the city where actually all the adjacent industries, all the mechanical workshops. I mean, a lot of, maybe there are 8,000 people working in the mine, but of course there's a lot of industries and commerce and so on around the mining and with the people that came there. So what is really peculiar about this city is, if you zoom in, that you see the river Parauapebas divides forest and city. So you have this ideal dichotomy of urban and nature next to each other. And we're going to show you quickly some pictures of how this looks like.
This is the mine. It doesn't look so big on the picture because you have nothing to like understand the scale, but each of these steps is pretty much like 15 meters high. And then you sometimes see trucks and you're like, oh, it's not so big, but the trucks are not trucks that you know from, I don't know, like construction sites. They're like 10-meter high trucks with like incredibly big tires, and yeah. There's a street that goes through the forest to the mine, and it's protected. It has a gate. And actually the city, it reminded us a bit of like a gold digger town. It's very fastly built because it very fastly came into being. But it also has kind of nice situations. And you have to imagine that pretty much daily people arrive in that city. Like it's the fastest growing city of the country. And people live or build this kind of shacks from wood. And but what the government and what the municipality is doing at a quite impressive speed is flattening the land and building Minha Casa Minha Vida project settlements in large scale and in really large quantities. Like we visited several contractors, and the first thing that they would always tell us is how many units they can produce per day. You want to say something about the neighborhoods? So these neighborhoods, sometimes they already look quite old, but they're brand new. And people start to like build themselves like walls or like appropriate them.
And this appropriation is actually also what what the government realized, that the basic housing unit that they provide is not sufficient to the needs of the people. So they were actually interested in our research because we were looking at how do people actually adapt the houses? What do they do? What kind of spaces do they create? And
like the situation that you see here, it's actually forbidden. This is a shop, and it's not allowed to make a shop. Just from the fact that the funding that you get to build a house, like a residential unit, can't be used on a commercial entity. But of course, if you don't open a shop like that, oh, you're way too slow. If you don't open a shop like that, there's no way for people to like go and buy groceries close by.
So
and
this is part of the...
There you can see how we looked at how people already changed their units. Also to kind of understand in which way we would have to change our... but this was like the halftime. Okay. Okay, good. We were looking at how people are changing their units to understand what their needs are. And now the four promised, we're not going to explain like the whole project that the students did. We just want to show you some aspects. So one of the projects was like concentrating on the idea of shade, which is extremely important in the climate where it's a very exhausting climate. Basically in Parauapebas, it's very hot and very moist. When the sun is there, it's getting super hot and like it's really burning, and then there's 2 times a day there's like a rain shower. This group just realized that it's what would be the most like the most valuable condition would be one where you can be in the shade. And also we saw a lot of people, even if they don't have a lot of money, they're always driving in the car. And when we asked why, they said like, yeah, then we can have like the AC on and we're not getting wet. This group realized that it would be a big improvement if you could install just like simply more shade in the public space. And like here on a smaller scale, they kind of installed different like textile or like just like courtyard houses where you also have in your private house more shade. But I think the more crucial thing that they developed was that they just kind of arranged the grid of the neighborhood that they were supposed to plan in a way that it would be shaded by the buildings, just like by the direction. And maybe one...
Like the public street would be shaded by the building. That was maybe
a little thing that maybe some of you know, like but I found it fascinating when I first went to Brazil, is that in Europe or in Switzerland, we always consider the south side of a building the most sun exposed because the sun is pretty much doing this move. In Brazil and close to the equator, the sun is doing kind of almost this move. So the most exposed sides of a building is not the south. It's a little bit the north, but it's mostly west and east. Like first half of the day it's east, second half of the day it's west. Another, like that, the second idea was looking more at the buildings that are right now. You have the building in the middle of the plot. Usually in the beginning you don't have a fence, that's already kind of an appropriation, but that's what everybody does first. But you end up with a building that is actually very exposed to your neighbors in all directions. And they made a very simple move by just kind of splitting up the building in two parts and kind of creating, and the additional cost that they expected from having more facade, they tried to get back by making the plot a little bit smaller. Because we really tried to stay within the financial requirements and kind of create this private courtyard. And what I found interesting in this, because when I looked at this picture, I realized that it's kind of clear that there's already more qualities in this situation than in the one where the building is in the middle and you have this tiny strip of land around. But when you look at how the buildings are arranged later, you also realize that it's becoming more efficient because, as you might know, one of the big problems also in our suburban settlements is that infrastructure is very inefficient because we have long distances and little needs, very dispersed. And in this model, because the buildings are pushed to the edge, you were already able to combine, this is one unit. So 4 units already have their cores put together. It's just more efficient. And these 2 units have 2 courtyards that are kind of facing each other. They're private, but they're kind of already building kind of a small community. And then in a bigger scale, again, these are the 6 units that we just saw on the left. They create another kind of situation.
This is a typology I quickly want to explain because it's something we witnessed in Cidade de Deus, where we did a research on on how the neighborhood was transformed over time. And this typology or urban plan is really interesting. It's a public square for a neighborhood. We call it the swirl square. What is specific about this is that the streets that lead into this neighborhood square, you don't see how they exit. So that makes it a kind of, it creates a barrier, a soft barrier somehow. So
there's no through street. It goes in, but it doesn't go out. Sorry. There's no street touching the square and going through. They all kind of end in the square, and then they make a swirl.
So these typologies actually are the ones that, for example, in City of God, in Rio, resisted the gradual informalization or adaptation. So people did not build on those little squares because they were somehow really maintained by the neighborhood. They really, it's a design trick, kind of a really nice one.
We just copied it, or they just copied it. This is all student work.
We're gonna really go quickly through the next two.
Is this the last one? Or
no, there's one more.
Okay,
so
quick.
There was another group that tried to link the river to because the river is kind of, strangely, it's the backside of the city. So even though if we come there, of course we took the hotel, the only hotel that is actually overlooking the river and the forest. But for the rest of the city, that's not an issue. The forest and the river it's not a topic. It's not good. And so this group tried to create a neighborhood that is actually closely related to the river, with piers that connect the whole ground floor to the river. And there's also a very nice typology they developed with all the 3 apartments in one little tower with all the kitchens in the ground floor, where we first thought, oh, that is not really efficient, but actually we think that this is a nice typology that would actually foster a kind of a communication between the residents and also create this kind of neighborhood. You see it on the left side. This is the little tower. And then there was one more that was working with the forest, also something that we, of course,
this is almost too obvious to be, yeah. But when you see how the usual Casa Minha Vida is built, they make all the land flat. They take away all the trees, then they make the land flat, and then they build, and then they're really hot. And when you're in the forest, it's actually, the climate is quite, it's still very moist, but it's not as hot. So it's actually a nice climate. So it's kind of course, it's not easy to build within the forest. You have to put your building on stilts, but it's just like a very basic idea that I think makes sense in the context.
So, and the second thing we would like to show you is a very different thing. It's something we did with a colleague of ours, actually a cultural historian, who has on his business card the nice title, futurologist. And he asked us to join in a kind of research for Daimler-Benz for the future innovations at research and development, which is the kind of the team that is really looking at long-term transformations. And he proposed to them to look at urban luxury. So with urban luxury, he doesn't mean luxury in cities. He means more like luxury in the urban age. So it's a bit, that's how he defined it for us. And he asked us to go through our image archive of images that we took and images that we just had in our archive to look at what for us is luxury nowadays. And that we presented to this research tank, and maybe in 10 years this will somehow go into a car. We don't know. But we will guide you through this as maybe an outtake or a kind of an outlook on what is actually luxury, or what do we define as luxury.
We're always going to read the text.
A well-tended in-between space that gives pleasure to both inhabitant and passerby. A public space that feels like a very charming private living room. Having a tent where you can change clothes. Being chauffeured. Feeling safe. A small kiosk for drinks, bubblegum and chocolate close by. The rare pleasure of wildflowers in the city. A corner room facing the sea. The opportunity to temporarily adopt a public space for a private matter. When everything has its place. Living in a building that has a name. Giving the ground floor of your building to the city. Playing dominoes with neighbors on the street on a Wednesday afternoon. See and be seen on a Sunday afternoon promenade. A corner room, you see, we like corner rooms. A corner room with windows opening in 2 directions, overlooking the neighboring roofs. Walking through São Paulo along an elevated highway on a Sunday afternoon. Marble. Delicious, cheap street food. Looking out into the crisp midday light from a shaded plaza. Watching the rain from inside. A glass roof covering a street. When interior and exterior melt together. A garden and pool in downtown Mumbai.
May I quickly interrupt because you might wonder why we put like the most expensive hotel in Mumbai on this platform today, but in a way I also see like luxury hotels as to some degree a common luxury, because it is like you can go and like, actually that's coming later, you can go to a hotel and just have a coffee and you actually do have the experience of luxury, and it is not a closed space. It's like kind of a public space.
A room on the second floor whose high ceilings radiate generosity onto the public square surrounding it. The freedom and creativity to use an institutional building entrance as a mirror for one's dance rehearsal. The hospitality at a cafe that fits only 4 people. The feeling that someone cared enough to leave you a piece of information. No more bicycle chain stains. A calm, cultivated courtyard in a bustling city. Swimming in alpine water. A jungle in downtown São Paulo. The generous height of an early 20th century arcade. The feeling of being trusted by the owner of a building to act carefully and thoughtfully. The freedom to take or leave a car wherever you like. The unexpected comfort of a too big leather seat in a train station. The freedom to take or leave a bike wherever you like. Sunbathing on a bed indoors. Representative facades on a public housing. The feeling of being informed about what's happening in the city.
I think that we also have to explain.
We
Not
got
quickly.
No.
No, but otherwise it's nothing worth. So it's clear to every Swiss person, but who is not Swiss doesn't know these. And it's basically it's these like structures that are being put up when a building is in the phase of approval or like is going towards approval. And basically when you see those in the city, you know that there is going to be a building, or it's like there is a building planned and you have the right to object.
A local corner bar that serves some food and shows the night's soccer match. Looking onto lush green from one's bed. A short morning dip in a pool with a view of the world's most iconic rock. A white tablecloth lunch. A swim in crystal clear water of Lake Zurich on an early summer morning. 2 suns. Affordable public transport with a logical, comprehensible price policy. A palace housing, a public amenity. Double-decker front row. A bar with something to hold on to. A private outdoor space in the middle of the city. A hammock on an unfinished top floor overlooking Ipanema. A beautiful public swimming pool in close proximity to your home. Having a surprisingly inexpensive hot chocolate and enjoying the NZZ on a rainy day in the windowless lobby of Borolac. High ceilings. A beach in the center of the city. Public workout apparatus made of polished aluminium. Well-dressed people. And that's the categories then that we also try to
we did them afterwards, the categories. So we first made this like random list of things, and then we thought, how can they work better with what we did? And we made categories which turned out to be architecture, beautiful things, cars, extra care, comfort, community, contemporary, contrast, countries in transition, dark blue, developed countries, elevating, exclusive, freedom, generosity, high standard, hospitality, identification, inclusive, individuality, involvement, nature, precision, services, sufficiency, no bullshit, things that cause envy, timeless, transport, understatement, very urban, water, what money can buy and what money can't buy.
Okay. That's it. Thanks.
So I understand you presented this to some managers of Mercedes-Benz. What was their response?
To be honest, we did not personally present it, okay, but the futurologist presented it. Okay. So I don't know. we made a book out of it.
we basically made a book. These were like around 50 entries of 250 that we made into a book.
But I'm asking because obviously this is where we really get to the crucial question, because Mercedes-Benz has to make money, right? You deliver them things that money can't buy. And so I expect them to get either completely frustrated or completely enthusiastic about a possibility of doing something that is maybe more meaningful than just selling cars. And the car manufacturer companies, they have already this situation, especially in Germany, that younger people that are 18 today, don't make their driver's license as the first thing in their adult life, as probably you did, right? But because they still don't think a car is essential to their life, they won't buy a car, and so they have to make different business models with car sharing, for instance, and maybe at some point even people won't be interested in using cars at all. So somehow I think the corporate world is facing this very dilemma that we've been talking about before when Max was presenting, that things that can't be commodified become more and more interesting for people to define their lifestyle. And the question is, if we don't make a revolution away from capitalism, which was a little bit suggested by Jean-Philippe Vassal, somehow there has to be some kind of amortization or economical, sort of value kind of indexing to this. So do you think, how do you think you can introduce these wonderful kind of index of luxurious moments into a real economy? Is that possible, or do we have to make the revolution?
I mean, for Mercedes, Mercedes is trying right now to rebrand themselves or see themselves as a mobility. Like, it's not about cars anymore. They call themselves mobility industry. So that is already one shift. But maybe the case is not like Mercedes is not the thing we should discuss. I think what we try to, or what we can see here is that, or what always strikes me is that the car industry, of course, I don't have a car, and I won't buy a car, probably never. And many of our friends do that.
Did they still pay you after you said that?
No, I mean, of course not. But still, the whole industry that is behind cars, and also I think that also counts for architecture. Like, the real estate industry is such a huge kind of it's a huge industry that has so many impacts also on so many people's lives. And I'm of course against cars, but still I understand, and I think it's not so kind of bad that a big company that has a lot of knowledge on mobility and so on is trying to reinvent themselves. And I think for the building industry, that would be great. And I think it's also the architect. So I'm not super sure if we should really be so much in opposition. And I'm also not so sure if we should fight for a revolution. I'm much more in favor of an evolution, because I think the system manages some things quite well. And
so capitalism can heal itself.
Somehow, I think there is there is a chance. Yes, okay. I think so.
Jack, what do you think?
I think there's a very tricky assumption to the sentence that you just said there, which is about whether or not capitalism can heal itself. And of course, someone like Kondratiev, who was, of course, executed under the Soviet regime for suggesting that capitalism had cycles and that there was not, let's say, a final phase to capitalism. The reason this was made impossible, he described that there were, 55-year cycles. And then the idea is, of course, that capitalism will continue endlessly, right? And that was unacceptable to Stalin. And so I think we have to be very careful when we talk about, let's say, the end of capitalism and what that means. The other thing is, of course, we have already experienced the revolution, if you want to describe it that way, because I don't think revolutions ever occur as a single, and even, one of the stupid things about Brexit was no one at any point said this will take 10 years and will cost 2% of GDP. You know, it's like as soon as you begin to think about it in time and money rather than as a single event, it becomes a different thing. So in terms of, let's say, the evolution of capitalism, we are already in a different paradigm, and a paradigm of zero growth, zero inflation, and this is a completely different way of thinking. But what really I appreciate very much both these projects, particularly, well, actually, I really like the architectural proposals, but what I saw in the urban luxury and the Daimler-Benz, the association for me as to why this would be relevant for a car company was immediate, which is that I took Uber Pool for the first time a few weeks ago, and I did it. It's like Uber, but instead of paying for a one direct trip, you get it at maybe 40% of the cost, but you have to share the car with other people. It therefore takes a lot longer because you don't go in a direct line. You kind of approximate the direction. But I did it because I wanted, so, you know, everyone who got into the car, I said, hello, I'm an architect. Can I ask you some questions about Uber Pool? They were very resistant. They thought this was extremely rude. But actually what was really strange about it is it's a completely new type of public space in which it's like the space of a bus, but at the scale of like a bed. I mean, it's really like an unusual public space. And so when I see this, it's like, what do Daimler-Benz need to know? They need to know what is the quality of, what are the intrinsic qualities of public space, and how do they work at an intimate level? And that's what becomes relevant for, I think, the future of the car. And that's what the huge opportunity of the car is in the future, as a completely different type of public space. Anyway, sorry, a bit of a long comment.
No, cool, thanks.
That's great. Matthias? This is Matthias Echanova, actually our next speaker.
Yes, thank you for this very nice presentation.
Keep standing, please, so people can see
sure.
you.
Thank you for the presentation. This is actually some kind of reaction to the three presentations. One thing which I find interesting, which seems to be happening a lot in architectural practice these days, especially in alternative architectural practice, is that in fact we're no longer really looking for some kind of revolutionary outcome. This is kind of old school to say that, oh no, revolution is happening and this is what we should be fighting for. In fact, a lot of urban practitioners and urban theorists have been stuck for a long time, all the way to the maybe to the 21st century, into this idea that we cannot really do practice within capitalism because then we sell out. And when you connect this to the idea of the brief, and many people have tried to subvert the brief. In fact, subverting the brief, subverting regulation, and managing with financial constraints is what architects do all the time. I mean, that's what they really do. You get a brief, you say, okay, this is the impossible regulations, we should make it impossible to do something good. And also there's impossible budget, but yet, we'll do something. Usually it's on the side of maximizing the profit, for the investor. So the architect works with the accountant, he works with the lawyer. In fact, he becomes a specialist of, reading those, these other languages and to translating them into a form. And here we see practices which also look at the brief and try to subvert to do something totally different. So it's kind of like part of this hacking culture which we've been talking a lot about. I'm wondering if this is something which is only going to be staying marginal, on the margin of the practice. We're hacking for common good or for some ideals or for some political kind of aims. Or if this is something that could, potentially, become a bit more mainstream and become some kind of, evolution. And I really don't know. I don't know the answer to this question. But what I feel is that, it was also very frustrating for many years to be stuck with this idea that if you engage in practice, and it happened to us a lot because we work in very poor neighborhoods in the context of Mumbai. If you even engage with the practice, it means that you actually accepting the condition, and therefore you stop being a revolutionary, stop being politically very conscious. So where do you stand? I mean, this is maybe a more general question to all of us, and maybe not something that you could answer just now, but just something I'm thinking about, and just want to raise the question to everybody. Thank you.
So can it become mainstream, or does it stay marginal, this type of practice? Is it the kind of court jester of capitalism that shows its tolerance to other ideas, or can it actually influence its own practice?
I think there is, you can see sometimes, already, I mean, this is something that we believe would be great if it happened, but we also see the beginnings of this, that I think the kind of, let's say, the first step is to kind of tweak a brief. But I think the second step would be to kind of tweak the system, which is like going one step further and kind of moving into the role of somebody who is developing and who is starting projects. And I think this, I mean, in Berlin, this is happening. Like we know architects who find a plot and who are just looking for the right client to make something out of it, which is, I think, already moving to one step further. And I think this is also the one that could be the more, like, economically more sustainable one, because I think often these, like, tweaking the brief projects are financially, like, problematic for the architect, because usually you just do a lot more work within the existing brief and the existing budget. But I think if you move that one stage up and move in the direction of the person who is initiating the project and who is developing the project, and of course is also kind of then getting that margin of budget, I think that is, that for me, I think that could be a comparably realistic and also very, very attractive role to enlarge this. And to that's the evolution, I think, also that you are referring to. Or?
What a nice note to end this section. Thank you.